Raina Brooks didn't plan on being chased through a dark parking garage in the middle of downtown Los Angeles, but here she was, clutching her purse like a weapon and glancing over her shoulder as the sound of heavy steps echoed behind her. "Hey," a voice yelled. She picked up her pace, heart racing. Her phone had died 15 minutes ago. Her car was parked somewhere on the second level and she was on the third. Panic clawed at her throat. Then suddenly, a man stepped out from behind a pillar ahead of her. She froze. Was he with them? Her fists clenched at her sides, ready to fight. But the man's eyes widened when he saw her. He looked about 40, with tired eyes and a worn flannel shirt. He didn't look threatening, more like someone who'd just gotten off a long shift. "Raina," he said, stepping toward her with cautious urgency. "It's me, your friend." "Come on." He reached out and gently took her arm like they knew each other. She blinked. "What? Just go with it," he whispered. "You're being followed." Behind them, the footsteps grew louder. The man tightened his hold and turned her away. "Let's go, sweetheart. Your dad's waiting." She nodded without hesitation, letting him guide her quickly to the stairwell. They ran down one level, and when they stepped out, she nearly cried with relief. The car was there. A sleek black SUV idled nearby. Before she could thank him, the SUV door opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a fitted black suit that looked custom-made. His presence was overwhelming. His dark eyes locked onto hers with a jolt of recognition, and then he looked at the man beside her. "Walter," the man said, his voice cracking. "Vance," the older man whispered back, stunned, and then the suited man crossed the distance and pulled Walter into a tight hug. It wasn't a polite embrace, it was the kind of hug that said, "I thought I'd never see you again." Raina stood frozen. The man whispered something into Walter's shoulder, and when he pulled back, his expression was raw. "You saved her?" the man asked. Walter looked confused but nodded. Yeah, I just saw she was in trouble and I owe you everything," the man said. Then he turned to Raina. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly, still trying to process what just happened. Yeah, I think so. I'll take it from here," he said gently. "Walter, please stay." "I don't want to intrude," Walter said, stepping back. You're not going anywhere." The man turned back to Raina. "I'm Vance Jennings." He extended his hand. "CEO of Jennings International." Her brain short-circuited. "Wait, that Jennings?" He gave a half smile. "The one with the downtown tower, yes." Raina shook his hand, too stunned to form words. Vance's hand was warm, confident, controlled. "We'll talk inside," he said. "You're safe now." They got into the SUV. Vance held the door for her, and Walter slid into the front seat like he belonged there. Inside, the air smelled like leather and something expensive she couldn't name. "Are you sure you're okay?" Vance asked again, turning to look at her. She nodded. "I didn't even see them coming. I was walking to my car and then, you don't have to explain." He leaned forward. "Tomorrow I'll have security review the cameras. Tonight I'll have you dropped off safely. But first dinner, you look like you haven't eaten." She hesitated. "I'm fine, really." He raised a brow. "Raina, you just survived a parking garage chase. Let me buy you a meal." "Okay," she said, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "Only if Walter comes." Walter turned around in his seat, clearly embarrassed. "I'm not hungry." "You're coming," Vance said firmly. "Both of you saved something important tonight." Raina gave him a confused look. "What do you mean?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked out the window and said quietly, "Walter's the man who raised me when my father left. I haven't seen him in over 20 years. She looked at Walter, whose face had gone pale. "You what?" she whispered. "It's a long story," Walter said softly. "I didn't know he was Vance Jennings when I saw you." Vance turned back to her, his eyes intense. "And you trusted him without even knowing who he was. That tells me everything I need to know about the kind of person you are." Raina's cheeks flushed. They pulled up to a rooftop restaurant in Beverly Hills. It was the kind of place she'd only ever seen on TV. Fairy lights draped across the terrace, white tablecloths, and a view of the entire glittering city. A valet opened her door. She stepped out, stunned. Vance helped Walter out gently, treating the man like he was royalty. Inside, they were seated at a private table with a perfect view. A waiter in a tuxedo brought champagne without asking. "I don't drink," Walter said, but he smiled at the effort. Vance ordered for all three of them lobster risotto, truffle pasta, and seared scallops. Raina sat silently for a moment, watching the man across from her. He was powerful, wealthy, and completely at ease here, but when he looked at Walter, he softened. "So, you really didn't know who he was?" she asked Walter quietly. Walter shook his head. "I moved across the country years ago, lost touch. I didn't know he became this." Vance leaned forward. "The money doesn't matter. You were my real dad. You taught me how to tie my shoes, how to drive. You're the reason I'm standing here." Walter's eyes welled up. After dinner, Vance personally drove them both home. Raina lived in a small apartment in Silver Lake, and she hesitated when they pulled up. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "This isn't exactly Beverly Hills." "I don't care about any of that," Vance said, looking at her. "You were brave tonight. That matters more." She stepped out of the car, but before she closed the door, he said, "Raina," she turned. "I'd like to see you again. Not because of what happened tonight, but because something about you makes me feel like I can breathe." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "I'd like that," she said softly. He smiled. "Good, I'll make sure you're safe from now on. You won't have to run again." As the SUV pulled away, Raina stood on her doorstep, her fingers still tingling from where he'd held her hand. She didn't know what just happened tonight, but something inside her told her this was only the beginning. Raina stared at the ceiling of her apartment, the city sounds outside her window unusually silent in her ears. Her heels still lay abandoned near the door, her purse on the floor where she'd dropped it. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Vance's face not as the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, but as a man who'd looked at her like she was something he hadn't expected to find. The next morning, she stepped into the small nonprofit office where she worked as an outreach coordinator. The building was old and the air conditioning barely held up, but the cause mattered. She poured herself a cup of stale coffee and sat at her desk, trying to focus on the week's event planning. Raina. Her manager, Angela, poked her head in. "There's someone here to see you." She glanced at the clock. "Now?" Angela nodded, looking vaguely stunned. "He's in a suit, like a real one." Raina stood slowly and walked into the lobby. There, standing in front of the outdated reception desk, was a man in a charcoal gray suit, holding a large white envelope. He stepped forward. "Miss Brooks?" "Yes, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Jennings." The man offered her the envelope. "This is for you. He asked that you open it when you have a moment, and he sends his regards." Before she could respond, he turned and walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of cologne and confusion. Back at her desk, she unfolded the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on thick, cream-colored stationery. "Raina, I hope today is quieter than yesterday. I'd like to see you this evening if you're free. I thought I'd make it easier to say yes." Vance beneath the card was a reservation confirmation for dinner at a private suite inside the Belvedere Hotel, and a card for a high-end boutique with an appointment under her name. Her breath caught. "Is that?" Angela peeked in again, eyes wide. "Is that real gold trim on that card?" Raina nodded slowly. "I think I just got invited to dinner with the CEO of Jennings International." Angela let out a long breath. "Girl, you better go." The boutique was nothing like anywhere Raina had ever shopped. The moment she walked in, a woman in sleek black greeted her by name and led her to a private dressing room filled with gowns, heels, and glimmering jewelry. "No pressure," the woman said with a warm smile. "Just try on whatever feels right." Raina hesitated at first, but something about the softness of the fabrics, the way they seemed to hang like they were made for her, made her forget the hesitation. She chose a deep sapphire gown with a low back and delicate straps, paired with silver heels that made her feel like she floated. That evening, a car arrived exactly on time. The driver opened the door without a word, and she sat in the back seat, nerves fluttering like wings in her stomach. The Belvedere Hotel was a palace of glass and gold. She was led through a private entrance, down a hallway lined with fresh orchids, and into a suite with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Vance stood by the window, hands in his pockets, wearing a navy suit that molded to his frame like it was part of him. He turned when he heard her, and his expression shifted. Something quiet, almost reverent, flickered in his eyes. "You look." He paused. "Perfect." She folded her hands in front of her. "You didn't have to do all this." "I did," he said simply. Because I wanted to. He gestured toward the candle-lit table set for two. The windows were open just slightly, letting in the warm air and the scent of jasmine from the terrace. She sat down, still unsure how to carry herself in this world of crystal glasses and silk napkins. "You're not used to all of this," he said, reading her expression. "Not even a little." He poured her a glass of water and smiled. "Good, I don't want someone who's used to it. I want someone real." She tilted her head. "Why me?" He didn't answer right away. "You moved toward danger, not away from it. You didn't know Walter, but you trusted your instincts. You didn't ask for anything. That's rare." She looked down at her plate. "You barely know me. I know enough. And I'd like to know more." Their food arrived: grilled sea bass with lemon butter, roasted vegetables, and a dessert that looked like it belonged in an art gallery. Between bites, they talked. Not about business or press releases or the board meetings he probably had every morning, but about books she loved, the music he used to play on an old upright piano, the time she tried to learn French and failed spectacularly. At one point, he leaned back and looked at her like he was trying to memorize her. "I don't get surprised very often," he said finally. "But you've shaken something loose in me," she laughed softly. "What does that even mean?" "It means I stopped expecting to feel anything real, and then I walked into a parking garage and saw you." Her breath hitched. He stood and extended his hand. "Come outside with me." She followed him through the sliding doors to the terrace. The city lights stretched in every direction, glittering like stars had fallen and settled on the streets. Vance turned to face her, the wind brushing his hair ever so slightly out of place. "I want to be honest with you," he said. "Walter didn't just raise me. He was the only person who stayed when everything else fell apart. I spent years searching for him. And last night, you brought him back into my life without even knowing who he was." She opened her mouth, but he raised a hand gently. "I'm not saying this to overwhelm you. I think what happened wasn't random. You think it meant something? I know it did." She stared at him, the ache in her chest unfamiliar and impossible to ignore. "I want to believe that." He stepped closer. "Then believe it with me." For a moment, the world around them faded: the city, the money, the chaos. It was just the two of them, standing in the soft glow of candlelight and moonlight, and something neither of them could name. And then, without asking, he reached out and gently touched her cheek. "I'm not going to rush you," he said, "but I'll be here, as long as you want me to be." Raina didn't know what the future held, but standing there with a man who had every reason to keep his world closed off and yet had opened it to her, she knew one thing she wanted to find out. The next week unfolded with a strange, quiet intensity, like the world had shifted and no one else had noticed. Raina moved through her days at the nonprofit with a sharper awareness of herself, like her skin hummed with something new, strange, and electric, though she couldn't name it. She hadn't seen Vance since the dinner at the Belvedere. Not because he hadn't reached out, he had, through unexpected ways. A bouquet of peonies had arrived at her office the day after, no card, just a folded note that read, "Still breathing easier. Hope you are too." Then, 2 days later, a donation appeared in the nonprofit's account, an anonymous sum large enough to fund their next 3 community events. Raina knew exactly where it came from, but she hadn't called him. Not yet. She found herself walking instead. Long walks after work, through Silver Lake's winding hills and quiet streets, just barely touched by city noise. She wasn't avoiding him, not really. She just didn't know what to do with the way her chest tightened every time she thought of the way he'd said her name. Late Friday afternoon, she stepped into the office's small break room to grab her jacket and stopped short. Walter was there, sitting at the tiny table with a half-empty cup of tea in his hand. He looked up, startled. "Didn't expect you to still be here." "I was finishing reports." She hesitated, then sat across from him. "You okay?" He nodded, but something in his face gave him away. "Tired, mostly. My body doesn't move the way it used to. You've been quiet since that night." Walter took a long sip from his cup before speaking again. "Do you ever feel like you're standing in someone else's life?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned back, eyes distant. "I didn't recognize him at first. Vance. His voice, maybe, but the way he stands now, the way he fills a room. I don't know that man, but I knew the boy. I still see him every time I close my eyes." Raina folded her hands. "He still sees you, that much is obvious." Walter's gaze slid to hers. He offered me an apartment, downtown, paid for, said I could quit my job, rest easy. You know what I told him? She shook her head. I said no. Walter's mouth twitched. Told him I didn't raise him to throw money at people and call it love. Raina blinked. That's bold, maybe. Or maybe I just didn't want to feel like a ghost in his skyscraper life. He stood slowly, wincing slightly as he straightened. But I miss him, more than I thought I would. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind hazy rooftops, Raina heard a knock at her door. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, Vance stood there. A crisp button-down rolled to his forearms, no tie, his jacket slung over one shoulder. His hair was slightly tousled, and for the first time, he looked less like a CEO and more like a man who hadn't slept. I wasn't sure if you'd open the door, he said quietly. You didn't call. I didn't want to wait for permission. She stepped aside. Come in. He walked past her, taking in the small apartment with a slow glance. He didn't comment on the chipped paint or the slanted floorboards. He just turned to face her and said, I saw Walter today. Raina leaned against the wall. He told me about the apartment. Vance's jaw tightened. I wanted to give him something more than words. He said no. I know, he exhaled, tired. I didn't expect him to accept. But I had to offer. She studied him. Why are you really here? His eyes met hers, and for a moment he looked stripped bare. Because I haven't stopped thinking about you, about that night, about the way you looked at me like I was just a man, not a name in a headline. She swallowed hard. I don't know how I fit into your world. You don't have to fit into anything. I'll make space. Raina turned away, unsure of what to do with the storm building in her chest. You're intense, Vance. I don't do half measures. He crossed the room, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. I've spent years building walls, he said, and you walked straight through them. She looked up at him. You're not easy to trust. I don't expect you to, but I'll earn it. He hesitated. Come with me tomorrow. There's a gala. I want you there not as a date, not as a statement, just as you. She hesitated. I don't have anything to wear. You will. I don't know if I'll belong. I do. Something in his voice made her chest tighten again. She nodded slowly. Okay. The next day, a dress arrived, not from a store. This one was custom. Midnight blue, with a neckline like falling water and fabric that moved like it was alive. The note pinned to the garment bag read, No one will outshine you, V. That evening, a car arrived at exactly 6. Her breath caught when she saw Vance waiting by the door, dressed in a classic black tuxedo, a single white orchid in his hand. He didn't say anything as he helped her into the car, but when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, something certain. The gala was held in a private museum, with marble floors and chandeliers like frozen stars. Photographers hovered near the entrance, but Vance placed a steady hand at the small of her back and guided her through the crowd like nothing outside their orbit mattered. Inside, people turned to look. Some with curiosity, others with speculation, but Vance didn't glance at a single one of them. You okay? He asked, voice low near her ear. I feel like I'm pretending to be someone else. He looked at her, eyes dark and steady. You're not pretending, they are. They danced once, just once. The orchestra played something soft and slow, and when he held her, she felt like no one else existed in the room. His hand at her waist, the hush of silk between them, the way his eyes never left hers. When the song ended, he didn't let go. I want more nights like this, he said. Even if I don't know which fork to use, he smiled, just barely. Especially then. Later, as they stood by a glass wall overlooking the city, Raina turned to him. Why do I feel like I've stepped into someone else's story? You haven't, he said softly. You're the story. And for the first time, she believed him. The sun had barely risen when Raina stepped onto the rooftop of her apartment building, the city still hushed beneath layers of dawn haze. The air was cool, the sky a soft blend of lavender and steel, and for the first time in weeks, her thoughts didn't feel like a storm pressing behind her eyes. She had woken up before her alarm, restless. Not with anxiety, she'd moved through enough of that, but with a kind of anticipation she couldn't name. Something had shifted at the gala, something she hadn't expected. Vance hadn't just pulled her into his world, he'd stood beside her in it, shielded her from the sharp edges, and then asked her if she wanted to stay, and she did. More than she had ever wanted anything, When she returned downstairs, a soft knock came at the door. She opened it to find Walter, holding 2 paper cups of coffee and looking unusually serious. "I figured you might be up," he said. She stepped aside to let him in, accepting the cup with a grateful nod. "I got a call this morning," he said after a moment. "From Vance." Raina raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" Walter set his coffee down. "He asked if I'd come with him to visit someone, didn't say who, just that it was important." "Are you going?" Walter nodded. "I told him I would, but I want to ask you something first." She leaned against the counter, curious. "What is it?" "Do you trust him?" The question caught her off guard, but not because she didn't know the answer. It was because she hadn't realized how certain she'd become about it. "I do," she said. "He's never tried to be anything other than exactly who he is. Even when that's messy." Walter studied her for a long beat, then he nodded again, slower this time. "That's good, because I think he's about to do something that matters." Later that day, Raina sat at a cafe in West Hollywood, waiting. Vance had asked her to meet him there, said he had something to show her, and she hadn't questioned it. Not after what they'd shared. When he arrived, he wasn't dressed like the CEO of anything. Jeans, a dark jacket, his hair windblown like he'd been driving with the windows down. He leaned down to kiss her cheek, not rushed, not performative, just a quiet moment that made the world narrow to the scent of his cologne and the press of his lips. "Come with me," he said. She followed him to a car parked out front. Not the town car, not the sleek SUV. An old convertible, sky blue with a cracked leather interior. She glanced at him. "This yours? First car I ever bought. Found it again last year. Couldn't let it go." He drove them along the coast, windows down, the wind tangling her hair as the ocean glinted to their left. They didn't speak much, and they didn't need to. The silence between them had grown comfortable, lived in. Eventually, he turned off onto a private road that wound up a hill dotted with wildflowers and eucalyptus trees. At the top sat a single-story house, old but cared for. The paint was weathered, the porch slanted, but the windows shone in the light. "This was Walter's house," Vance said. "The one from when I was a kid. I bought it a few years ago when I finally tracked it down." Raina stepped out of the car slowly, taking it in. "You never told him," he shook his head. "It didn't feel right until now." Inside, the house was quiet. The furniture had been restored, the rooms left almost exactly as they must have been decades ago. She walked through the living room, trailing her fingertips along a shelf lined with old books and framed photos of a boy with dark eyes and a too-wide grin. "You brought him here, didn't you?" she asked softly. Vance nodded. "This morning. I didn't tell him where we were going, just drove." When he saw it, he didn't say anything at first. He just sat on the steps for a while. Then he asked me if I remembered the time he painted the kitchen ceiling because I'd thrown a basketball straight up and cracked the plaster. "Did you?" "I did. Every second." She turned toward him. "Why now?" "Because I realized something last night. I've spent my life trying to build things that prove I'm not the boy who got left behind. Towers, companies, legacies, but none of it ever felt finished. Not until I had Walter standing beside me again. And you," he stepped closer, his voice low. "You're the first person who didn't try to fit into my life. You just walked into it and made it better." She blinked, heart pounding. "I know this is fast. I know it's messy. But I'm not asking you to move in or change who you are or pretend to be something you're not. I'm just asking if you'll let me keep choosing you." She looked up at him, and something inside her clicked into place. "You already know the answer." He kissed her then. Not like the first time, not hesitant, not cautious. This was all in. Sunlight poured through the windows, dust motes catching in the air like glitter, and for once the world outside didn't intrude. When they pulled back, she whispered, "What happens now? We go back to the city. You go to work. I go to mine, but maybe you let me pick you up after. Maybe we stop pretending we're just people who met by accident. And Walter, he's staying here. I asked him to. And this time he said yes." That weekend, Vance hosted a small event at a restored community theater downtown. Nothing formal, no press, just the nonprofit team, Walter, and a few close friends. Raina stood near the edge of the stage afterward, watching him speak. "I thought legacy was something you built in glass and stone," he said. "But I was wrong. Legacy is people. It's second chances. It's the ones who never left, even when you thought they had." He looked down at Walter in the front row. It's the man who taught me how to show up, and the woman who reminded me why it matters. Raina felt tears prick her eyes. After the applause faded, Vance stepped off stage and walked straight to her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just took her hand, lifted it to his chest, and held it there, right over his heart. And for the first time, she knew without doubt, without fear, that she wasn't just part of his story. She was his future, and he was hers. Raina stood in the wings of the ballroom, her fingers curled tightly around the velvet drawstrings of her evening clutch. The benefit gala was already in full swing, the soft clinking of champagne flutes and murmured laughter echoing off the high arched ceilings. The event had been Vance's idea, a fundraiser for community housing projects, quietly backed by Jennings International, but with no press releases, no corporate banners, just people, real faces, real stories. He'd asked her to co-host. She'd hesitated at first, but he hadn't backed down. You know these people, their lives, their needs. You don't need a microphone to have a voice. You already do. Now, watching the ballroom fill city council members, local organizers, past program participants, she felt something stir beneath her ribs. It wasn't fear. It was something fiercer. Something like purpose. Vance appeared at her side, dressed in a slate gray suit that made his presence even more striking beneath the chandeliers. But it wasn't the suit that made her breath catch, it was the way he looked at her, like she was about to change everything. "You ready?" he asked, offering his hand. "Are you sure I won't say something that gets us both kicked out of our own event?" He leaned in slightly. "If anyone tries, I'll buy the building and host it again next week." Her laugh was a surprised burst, and she let him lead her onto the stage with that same quiet confidence he wore like a second skin. As she stepped up to the podium, the conversations hushed. Lights warmed her face. For a moment, she stood in silence, scanning the crowd. She didn't speak like someone used to commanding rooms, but she didn't need to. Her voice was clear, grounded. "When I first walked into a shelter as a volunteer," she began, "I thought I was just giving time. But what I learned was that people don't need saviors. They need someone to see them, to stay, to care when it isn't convenient." She glanced at Vance, who stood just behind her, his gaze steady. "This man beside me, he's helped give us the tools, but the real work, the real heart, that's always belonged to the community. Tonight isn't about charity, it's about honoring the people who rebuild every day, and making sure they have the space to keep doing it." Applause rose like a wave, but she barely heard it. Vance had stepped forward, his hand covering hers lightly on the podium. He turned to the crowd, but his eyes never left her. "I've built towers, corporations, numbers that look good in quarterly reports, but none of it matters if it doesn't stand for something that lives outside of profit. This work, and this woman showed me that legacy isn't measured in glass, but in grit." After the applause died down and the music resumed, Vance led her off the stage, but they didn't return to the crowd. Instead, he guided her through a side door and into a quiet garden behind the ballroom. String lights hung from the trees, casting soft shadows across the cobblestone path. "I can't go back," he said suddenly. "Not to the way I was before I met you. I used to believe control was everything. That if I kept a tight grip on everything around me, I'd never feel the kind of loss I once did." She turned to face him, the distant hum of the party a soft echo behind them. "Then you came crashing into my life without warning, without pretense, and suddenly I didn't want control. I wanted chaos." "You're chaos." She stepped closer, her hands skimming up the lapels of his jacket. "Then take it. I'm not going anywhere." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small black box. For a moment, he just held it between them, the weight of it more than just physical. "I didn't plan this tonight," he said, "but I couldn't wait anymore." Her breath caught. "I've spent my entire life building things I thought would last, but I want to build something that breathes, that fights, that forgives, that loves. I want to build it with you." He opened the box. Nestled inside was a ring unlike anything she'd expected, simple, elegant, and unmistakably hers. A single emerald set in gold, deep and rich, like the first time he saw her and forgot how to breathe. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She smiled slow and sure and said, "Yes." They didn't go back to the party. Instead, they walked the garden path in silence, fingers linked, the ring already warm on her hand. Weeks passed. The wedding was small, held in the garden behind Walter's house. No press, no announcements. Just the people who mattered, and the vows they whispered with shaking voices and steady hearts. Walter stood beside Vance as his best man, his eyes misty but proud, his posture straighter than usual. Angela cried through the entire ceremony. Afterward, they danced on the lawn barefoot, Raina's dress catching the breeze as Vance spun her beneath the string lights. There was no orchestra, no photographers, just a single old radio playing something soft, and the sound of laughter tangled with love. They moved into a house overlooking the coast, not a mansion, but a place with history and space for the life they wanted to build. Raina kept working with the nonprofit, but now with full funding and a new community center breaking ground just minutes from their home. Vance still ran Jennings International, though he spent fewer hours behind glass walls and more time with his sleeves rolled up, walking through neighborhoods he used to overlook. Together, they started a foundation in Walter's name quietly, without fanfare, just impact. Some nights they lay tangled on the couch, barefoot and full of takeout, no titles, no deadlines. Just hands finding hands and laughter low between kisses. And every morning, without fail, he told her she was the best thing he ever built. They didn't need a skyline view or a jet waiting on the tarmac, they had each other. And that was more than enough.